Good morning. It's morning for participants live in the session, but know that this session is being recorded and will be available by a link in a direct email to participants of the session tomorrow morning. And then by the end of Friday, all of the PowerPoints from the 5 info sessions of the working groups, the recordings and the PowerPoints will be available on the front page of our website. So welcome, thank you. This is number 4 of a 5-part series that explores the background and history of the framework from phase 1. And we're now in phase 2 of a regional food system building effort through a collaborative network known as Food Future. So we've visited the work plan foundation for our farmers and producers working group. We've visited the same foundational work plan to relaunch our markets and buyers working group. Yesterday was the Access, Equity, and Sovereignty Working Group. And today we have 2 sessions, one right now, and then at 2 o'clock. The morning is Infrastructure Working Group. And then this afternoon we'll round out with an overview of where we're starting with the Farm and Food Business Working Group framework. So welcome. I'm Kimberly Lamandola, Chief Program Officer for NYSOG, which is the backbone support organization for the collaborative network project known as Food Future. And before I get to the very end of the PowerPoint, I cannot forget to welcome our staff. All of our staff is on, and I'd ask to unmute and do an introduction. I do have the video off for privacy going forward for viewing in the public realm. So you may not see us, but you can hear us. Deanna, would you please unmute and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kim. My name is Gianna Garwal, and I am the Program and Communications Manager here at NYSOG. I've been with NYSOG for about 3 months now, so pretty brand new, but I am incredibly passionate about food justice, so very happy to be here for that. If you, anything regarding communications, including our follow-up email, will be from me. So anything in that realm, I am your girl. Happy to be here with you all.
Thank you. Rachel.
Hi, y'all. I'm Rachel. I just started at NYSOG 3 months ago, and I previously worked at a company called Buffalo Go Green. I don't have a ton of experience in food justice, and I'm really excited to keep learning more here. I do have a lot of experience in social work, and I really am passionate about the environment also.
Excellent. Thank you. And Kristen.
Good morning, Kristen Tim, actually just finishing my first month here at NYSOG. Very excited about our transitioning here to action for our Food Future project, and just looking forward to getting to know everyone. Thank you for attending this morning.
Thank you. So if everybody can go back on mute. For those that are participating, welcome. Please, even if this is your multiple visit to a overview session this week, drop your name, email, and an organization or business or that you may be representing, or if you're here as an individual with interest, let us know that too, so that we can follow up directly with you with the materials that we mentioned. So here's where we'll spend our time today. We've just gone through some introductions, but we'll look at a little bit of where we've been as context to frame the really excellent and magnanimous foundation that we have established as our starting point. And then we'll get into the meat of the specific recommendations and starting places for the participants of the working group to start establishing priorities and focusing in on action-oriented work. And then we'll talk a little bit about the roles and objectives of participating on a working group. And then hopefully we will rally to collaborate and work together. So pardon me if you heard this before or you were actually part of the process, but back at the beginning of the pandemic, way in the Wayback Machine of 2020, we were hearing the initial impacts of the virus sweeping across, the globe. And I don't know about you, but I would sit and listen to the nightly news with apprehension and anxiety, and maybe this false sense of, well, it can't touch us here. And I'll say, I've told the story, my daughter closed on a house in just outside of Buffalo on January 2020. And I can remember stripping wallpaper in her 1940s Ranch Rambler, going, in February 2020, going, what is this virus? It won't come here, will it? What is this that we're hearing about? And then, 4 weeks later, the world came to a screeching halt, so to speak. But feeling immune before we actually saw some of the evidence right here in our own communities of the impact to our food system. This is just our food system. The impacts were across obviously every sector imaginable. But when we hear the thoughts and reports of the global food system, supply chains breaking down, embargoed grain and products not being able to move that are made as ingredients for processed foods and our fresh foods. We saw that beginning in March and April. Our own grocery store shelves in Western New York were becoming sparse and bare, and we've started to hear stories relative to our own Western New York region about food in restaurants that were forced to close down and colleges forced to close down that was being spoiling because nobody was allowed out of their home. So philanthropy, Western New York philanthropy, initiated and funded and charged a partnership with NYSOG and the Western New York Foundation to use some of that Western New York COVID-19 community response funds. Not only they were funding and helping emergency food providers stay ahead of the rapid influx and increase of newly insecure households or magnified insecure households. But why? And their question rhetorically was, what is a food system? What does it look like in Western New York? And where's the food? And why are people being differently impacted? So the Western New York Foundation and NYSOG quickly rose to the challenge, said, yeah, we will lead the process to undertake an assessment. And the charge that we were under was that we don't come up with a plan that sits on a shelf. The response strategy, though the response would be a strategy for actions to change or improve those conditions that we were seeing. So the lens of food security and the lens of understanding disequities in the food system were the two primary viewfinders that Western New York philanthropy charged us. And we who work in the food system or any kind of sector where there's a systems approach or network building knows that usually there's not one issue or challenge that's static and unto its own. When you look at a systems approach, there's ripples. So we pulled way back and said to philanthropy, it's not just food insecurity in order to look at food insecurity, we've got to look upstream and downstream on the food system, of which we identify as 5 functions. We identify the food system as the production of food, the processing of food, the distribution of food, the consumption or access points of food. And then the last point of the food system is dual focus, capture of waste food in the system, as well as land regeneration practices. So we undertook working with a set of 4 consultants from across various places in the US, and they formed under the SCALE. I think it's sequestering carbon and accelerating local economies. I think that was the acronym, under the SCALE team of consultants. And until everybody was approved to be able to safely travel via an airline, a lot of their research was done via virtual. But once it was safe to travel, they spent and became very familiar faces in Western New York over the course of nearly 2 years. And the framework was always intended that the assessment and any resulting actions coming out of the assessment phase would be participatory, highly participatory from the community census tract level up. So this was definitely not a top-down assessment. This and as well as top-down response strategies was always meant to understand the disequities, empower those who are most or least impacted to make changes that are self-determined for their own neighborhood, their own culture, their own community, their own county, region, and beyond. And this was from an excerpt from that final report. And it lists our service area as a 9-county region that we know in systems approach, especially with food, that doesn't know where that border is between maybe Erie County and Niagara County. Food moves, food needs to move. And if, the act of eating is an act of, politics, there's power in eating. So we wanted to look at the region that's typically defined as Western New York, which is 8 counties. Pulling back, looking at the emergency food providers, the food banks, which support the food pantries in being able to meet the needs of their local communities. We realized that the 8-county region is served by 2 separate food banks, Food Link in Rochester and Feed More Western New York in the Buffalo region. So we added Monroe County to the footprint of our service area for a couple of reasons, obviously inclusive of where the physical location is of Food Link, but also of the cultural knowledge, transfer technology that takes place along that New York State Thruway corridor between Buffalo and Rochester. A lot of exchange, a lot of mutual and reciprocal support among organizations working in food systems, which also includes community health, wellness, public health policy. So it was very important that we footprinted the Monroe County and working very hard so that Monroe County doesn't feel like the 6th toe on a foot. We hope going forward that those relationships that were forged during the assessment have still remained strong. And now that we're officially funded and in the implementation phase, that is Monroe County is a natural part of our service footprint. So the assessment, what did it leave? It left us with, and if you've attended this before, you've heard this stand-up routine, right? We have a board member who actually went through and counted. Since the recommendations are broken into sets, they're not enumerated, but our board member kindly counted and tabulated 144 distinct recommendations, primarily aligned along the thematic focus of the working groups. And the collaborative model that was established to be really not representative, to embody participation, which included a regional advisory council, formerly known as the RAC. We're renaming it going forward. And originally 4 working groups. That framework has been proven to be highly effective in not only engaging stakeholders who are have agency, who have a role in the food system, and that's all of us, because we eat, and how and where and what, if we do have a choice of where we get our food, we're all very important in that food system. And then the report projects out that this is not a magic approach in a short time frame. We're talking about shifting the culture and the um, the atmosphere and roles and wealth, where wealth is centered to be able to be made among participants in the Western New York food system. So this is not short-term work. Very, very, very broadly pulling back, the consultants found many strong assets and opportunities, and obviously, not surprising, many systemic inequities. And in fact, growing inequities, they say, pose a key threat. Where we get our food, disinvestment, especially in neighborhoods that we would known as redlining, typically by the finance sector, but even at the local community and city government level, with evidence of intentional disinvestment, which is racism. And then faltering farm businesses, as farming is a really challenging business, no matter what scale a farmer's takes. And then we've got lots of opportunities, but that's very broadly. Getting into more of the specifics, first of all, just looking at the collaborative network, why we are aligned in these layers, and why the interrelationships are that we've envisioning. So this junior high graphic that I did with ovals and circles, which I thought I was really doing good, is a little representation of the layers of interrelationship. So the biggest oval obviously is everybody who's an eater, everybody who would like to work as part of this collaborative network toward change, whether it's change for a particular group of people, for a particular locational neighborhood, county, whatever. But we're coming together under the collective impact model, which, as we come together under Food Future Western New York, we will agree that the work does not benefit just one organization or one group of people, unless we're working to ameliorate and reduce systemic barriers, access to capital. So those systemic challenges are the work of all of us, but overcoming those and getting change indicators in those areas means that we all have the ability to rise higher. So the leadership team, and if you're interested in wanting to be part of that role, is established going forward to be kind of the board of directors, so to speak, for all of the moving parts. The regional leadership team, formerly known as the Regional Advisory Council, is recommended by the consultants to be the shift to being the primary decision maker and counsel for the Food Future working groups, partners, interplaying equally with our NYSOG staff and board. But the phase one, we went through a series of convenings led by Dr. Samina Raja at University at Buffalo, because we were all in the room from 9 county representation, from various representation of communities, ethnicities, racial identities, and socioeconomic and our geographies. We have a vast geographic experience, from rural, suburban, peri-urban, urban, and metropolis in these 9 counties. So the question is, what is the thread that we can all agree to of this work? And the participants, decided on these key operating principles, they're called. And these are non-negotiable. So participants coming into a working group or the RLT or any part of our work, we will really make sure that our communications and marketing is evident, that we're working under the values umbrella that we're establishing JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion principles in all of the work. And that we are not doing this to keep doing this again and again for the same challenges or even the same opportunities that we might not approach in a sustainable way. This is not Band-Aid approach. We're looking to formulate strategies that are concretely applied toward change. We have among the 9 counties many portal points to accessing those institutions that know how to research, that can help us discern what data we may need. Even we may not know what we need, but if we're working especially toward policy or to substantiate and illustrate various needs or barriers in maybe among a particular group of people or locale, who can do that for us, and how do we use that so that we aren't, and that leads to concrete action, so that we're not spinning our wheels and saying, well, that didn't work. Well, maybe if we knew a little bit more specific. Well, we've got taps into those pools of knowledge. And that also helps inform policy. And overall, we're doing this work to promote economic development, wealth creation, opportunities equally available to everybody, as well as to promote economic sovereignty. That should be read as economic sovereignty and food sovereignty. So having the full panoply of culture changes that can allow the pathway for people who want to farm to be able to farm. People who want to start a food business can start a food business without systemic barriers to access to capital or infrastructure or land. And the collaborative model, so a network, basically focus on the word network. You've probably seen that illustrated in your workaday life or personal life as like a whole bunch of snowflakes and all these lines crisscrossing. It looks like an eye chart before you put the glasses on, right? It's all over the place. But that just shows that each of those points of light or stars or circles is a person or a group or a neighborhood. And all the lines, you're connected at least to maybe one other, and then through that connection, 3rd, 4th, 5th degrees. So the network we're creating in food systems is not unlike that, but we'll have the benefit of a backbone support organization to provide the TLC. And believe me, it takes a lot of facilitation, moderation. It takes a lot of leadership to identify, oh, we heard this. Did I hear this in one of the working groups? Let's extract that and see if, learn a little bit more, and let's see if there are funders or opportunities to secure funding to help whatever the opportunity or challenge may be. So we're operating, according to the Aspen Institute of Community Strategies Group, as a collaborating network. And there are 3 other networks they describe, but the definition for the collaborating network is that we are looking for long-term system creation or change. And that we're looking at resources so that we are collectively agreeing, no matter what role or identity each of us in the work together, are working to bring equity in not only financial resource and investment, but access to financial resource, investment, food, farmland. And then we have high trust among us. That is key. And that's reflective of the backbone support organization, or the backbone support model's 5 basic premises: that we all agree to a shared agenda, that we all agree to make sure our efforts are equitably focused across our partners, and that we have a high level of transparency and communications are shared among the network. So nobody is, sequestering obviously there's confidential information, but that knowing the work of the network will be established if any research or opportunities or grant funding that is, collegially shared among the partners, and we work together. And I didn't highlight the highest level of risk because we know the greatest level of risk in a collaborative network is not having the facilitation and organization in the back of the house. So we call the backbone support organization to manage all of the meeting convenings, note takings, initiate communications, but that doesn't mean we do it. This is an empowered network. So we're all building toward empowering leadership. And, that shifts the role of the administrative support organization to be less heavily dependent on the communications, on convenings, right? But we have the greatest choice for effectuating systems change. That's what we want to focus on. Looking back at the historic framework, which frames the working groups. So the consultants, consult based on filling their minds with information. So the initial framework of the first iteration of the RAC and the working groups, of course, were meant to be high level and lived experience level think tank, so to speak, for them. The consultants reached way deep into these very kind participants to extract information. What is the reality? Tell me more about East Buffalo. Tell me more about what's going on in downtown Niagara Falls. Tell me what's going on with the farming community in the Southern Tier. And as well, during the assessment phase, we, the two co-partners, which was NYSOG and the West New York Foundation, charged that the time, almost 2 years that the consultants spent doing this, was not meant to be assessment only. We wanted them to demonstrate change in action during the course of their consultancy. They said that normally isn't written into the contract. They agreed to it. And we did have a couple of significant quote unquote, wins, I'll call them successes, that projects that grew out of were funded and have made a change. So just even in the assessment version, the dynamics of bringing people together primarily virtually, because this is 9 county, it's hard to convene one working group on a particular day and expect people to drive in from a 9 county swath. So a lot of the work going forward will remain virtual convenings with a few individual convenings in person of the working groups. And we expect one mega event with everybody convened, and we're looking, well into the fall for that. So that was really the frame of the historic version. Going forward, the consultants have recommended not only strategies and work for the working groups, but also for NYSOG as the organizational support organization, and the roles of each of these two leadership. So the regional leadership team, newly named, that will shift from primarily advisory to a stronger project leadership. If you jump on our website, foodfuturewny.org, you can read the executive summary or the full report. And the full report has very extractive discussion. And I don't mean that in a negative term. It fully explains why and the roles that the consultants envision. So these are just bullets. And that we also increase the representation. The regional leadership team was more of a higher original version, higher level, higher leader, maybe professional participants. Going forward, we need to have the regional leadership team be more representational of those that are mostly impacted and involved with the food system or production of food. And that includes representations of farmer, food businesses, farm worker, and labor orgs. So again, if you're interested, we're still populating the roster of the leadership team. That team will work very closely with a soon-to-be contracted equity consultant. And then the equity consultant and our Rachel, who is our program and diversity manager, and all of the partners will work toward a couple of new elements of building. So, but shift over, we're here to talk about the working groups. The underscore by the consultants was that we absolutely are aware that this is where the real work is done. I don't want to say real work, that doesn't discount the regional leadership team, but this is where the action focused priorities that come up. These are people on the working groups that are in the lived experience of some sort, that are more readily connected to trends, more readily connected to sudden changes in the food system and its impact to maybe the people or sector that they're working in. So we want to make sure that, so that's why we're launching the working groups first as we're rebuilding the regional leadership team. There is a method behind this, and that the working groups are empowered not only with increased decision-making, agenda, and investment priority setting, but have access to some funds that could provide flexible injection of capital for projects or opportunities that may exist. And that they are encouraging, obviously, that the working groups spend a little bit more time working across each other. So leading to that, these are the 5 working groups that we ended that phase 1 with. Originally, since there were 4 consultants and each consultant envisioned being the primary facilitator, convener, knowledge extractor, information sharer for a particular working group, they set up 4. And it was soon evident as they got into the discussions that, first of all, it was very difficult to separate the working groups apart from each other, because with a systems approach, what happens with farmers happens it impacts the markets, impacts buyers' ability to buy at institutional volumes, which then impacts where food is available to be accessed. And also, if it impacts farmers, it can impact the type of food that may not be culturally relevant to communities. And then, of course, anything that happens to farmers or producers to say, oop, I need to scale up, or I need this equipment. Well, access to capital is you might as well have bars and a lock and key. It is so difficult. But what came through almost all of these was the discussion of infrastructure, that farmers need equipment, land, buildings, access to utilities, markets and buyers. We need, or whether it's retail or wholesale volume buying or regional distribution, like our food hubs, you need infrastructure, and infrastructure is aging. And then that also includes roadways. That also includes digital technology. So, and then we advance to the description for the others. But infrastructure was the 5th working group that needed really a separate specialty focus. And going forward, we're keeping these 5 working groups as they are, as our starting point, but know that the intent is this is not proprietarily determined, and this is not an owned project by any means by NYSOG. These are living document groups, so to speak. If among the participants it's determined that, hey, we need a couple more ad hoc working groups under access, equity, and sovereignty, let's do it. Or you know what, it seems like we're having the same conversation with this working group and this working group. Do we need to convene people separately? So what I'm saying is this is totally flexible going forward. but it has to be self-determined by the participants. So that's the one thing that we really want to underscore, that we are all empowered to build the food system that really is the food future of our existence here in Western New York. But this is our starting point. So we begin as a starting point of the recommendation. So those are the action steps, goals, and how we're going to get there are outlined, 144 of them, in the report. But we're also starting each working group with a foundation of a one-pager that the participants developed. So the participants of the original working groups each created a mission statement and a list of initiatives and ongoing tasks. We're starting with that knowledge plus the working group specific information. So remember, this working group came out of the markets and buyers. So in the body of the multiple 100-page report, and I don't mean that to discourage you from reading it, read it, get into the appendices. There's a lot of information in the appendices. But the recommendations for the infrastructure working group are found in the markets, infrastructure, and supply chain section. They've grouped their findings all together, but then they have a separate set of recommendations for both the markets and buyers, and a separate set of recommendations for the infrastructure group. And that's what we'll get into today. But originally, the intent of this group was to foster a culture of networking and collab among diverse food system stakeholders to build scale appropriate infrastructure that supports a good food system. We build on existing assets. Strategies to scale from local to regional and transnational will be explored. Priority areas will include meat processing, transportation, logistics, e-systems, and data portals, and innovations in dairy processing and export networks and systems. So export networks and systems is those farmers that would like to scale up and move more of their food through more of a distributive network where there is the potential of greater profit per unit, greater profit margin. We want to create that opportunity for everybody to get into a broader sales market, while also keeping a focus on making sure that our residents in Western New York have equity in accessing the food, the kind of food that they want or is culturally relevant. And then these were a couple of their ongoing tasks. We'll get into that more in the report. So very broad findings. These are the findings. These are the same findings slide that was used for the markets and buyers working group, because so much of what the markets, meaning the point farmers markets, retail, wholesale, mobile markets, e-commerce, organizations like Produce Peddlers and Fresh Fix, they buy local food. I mean, so there are all kinds of innovations happening right now, but that was really inherently intermingled with infrastructure, was most closely related to this markets and buyers group where it originally emerged from. So those are the findings, pretty high level. That we have, consultant findings. The most critical infrastructure gap right now is meat processing, and I can talk a little bit about that. But the emergence of alt retail, alternative retail means any place that is selling food, especially local food options, that is not a full service grocery. So it would be a convenience store, it would be a bodega, it would be a farmer's market. It would be an online ordering system. It could be a mobile market. It could be any number of those models that are not a full service grocery. And there is, second from the bottom, we were convening people at the height of gas prices through the roof, and the cost of moving food when it was available was exorbitant. And of course, that was evident at the if you were able to go to somewhere to purchase your food and have a choice of food available, the price point was noticeably higher. So looking for ways to improve the cost of gathering food, distributing it, and moving it, and labor issues across all sector, all points, whether you are a farmer, whether you are a processing plant of food, whether you are a transportation company moving food, whether you are a retail, Whole Foods, no food store, where if you're selling food, you still have probably trouble getting people to show up to work, and capturing waste and composting businesses, land regeneration. It's hard. So very specifically, the primary goals just for the infrastructure focus, apart from the market and buyers, very, very specific. But at the time that we were convening, the fact was learned that livestock, animal producers growing beef, pork, and also poultry. There were goats and some specialty lambs and specialty producers had no place to process their food. So if they want to process their food so that individual parts are available fresh or frozen at your full service grocery store or at a farmer's market in New York State, that has to be done in a USDA slaughter facility. We euphemistically call it a processing facility, USDA. And I don't know if we can share when we get into this working group what that means, but that means the facility where those animals are brought to be processed, there is a USDA inspector on site for to track every single animal. And the cost of that inspector is charged to the processing facility owner, which then of course charges back. And there are fewer and fewer processing houses at USDA level, especially those that can process animals that have been raised under the very strict certified USDA organic, as well as certifying humane raised and processed. And it's critical because when your animal is ready to come to market, farmers were telling us that they were had to book that the few plants available were taking appointments 2 years out. So we had one farmer put it in the context that I raise pigs. I am making processing appointments for the 3rd generation offspring of a sow that I don't even have yet. And so we know the demand is high. The demand only has increased by restaurants, by individuals for local meat in individual parcels. So the driver is there, and it's a critical need. Not only that, but processing food. So we hear people say, well, we need a commercial kitchen or we need a community kitchen. In order to process a raw food product into even pickles, you can't do that in your home kitchen and legally sell it to the public per unit. There are labeling requirements for food safety. There are layers. So of course you may know somebody who's making whatever in their home kitchen and maybe selling it off their back porch or behind the backside of the tent at the farmer's market. I mean, I have no comment on that. We're not a regulatory business, but knowing that they're doing it probably because the restrictions and regulatory framework is very onerous. So when we talk about, well, a community kitchen, if you're talking about a kitchen needed to sell an individual unit of food at retail, we need a commercial kitchen, and that's not a big That's not an easy lift. And I know we've got a couple that have just recently opened in Buffalo, and the consultants, you get into the report, mentioned very specifically businesses and organizations that this project should support and serve to leverage and expand. So this is, like I said, this is just the flyover. I encourage you to get a little deeper into the report. And if you don't want to, we will in the infrastructure working group. So a lot of, how do I say, bricks and mortar equipment type of activities recommended to build out the infrastructure that really is the crux of processing locally grown food and making it available to people who want to buy it. And also working with BIPOC. If you don't know what BIPOC means, that is an acronym for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. And we know if you fall in any of those identifiers, you may have most likely been generational experience to racism, trauma, and other intentional or unintentionally biased actions that have eliminated or prevented having full agency, full voice, and equal parity to the role that you want to play, or even have a basic right as an eater to play in our food system. So that we work under the Food Future Western New York Collaborative to build support and ownership. And I think it was the market and buyers, they worded it very specifically that the Food Future work provides the resources and framework so that BIPOC leaders lead the work and within their communities, within their cultures, within their locations or geography. So that's a very important distinction I do want to make, that this work is really focused on empowerment, leadership, and knowing when to lift and when and who needs to step back and let the leaders lead. So I'll go through these a little quickly. So the meat processing, as I just maybe set up a little bit of an example of the critical need. Out of the project of just working group people coming together across a 9-county area, we learned of a trending idea, an idea that was emerging among the husband and wife team that run Rise and Swine Farm, that they had an idea to create a very small scale farmer cooperative USDA facility on their farm. They dropped this into the working group, got a lot of support, and followed through on their model, which is named Alliance Farm Butchery. And it's set up to serve just a group of 20 to 25 farmers in their local community near Holland. And, the USDA inspector will be on site in the brand new slaughter side, and then they build a brand new 20C kitchen. But there was a funding gap. They had been self-funded. I think even selling family pieces and things so they would not have to incur debt. And as they discussed in the working group, they had a certain amount of gap. NYSOG was able to understand that gap, understand the need, and understand their projections that 20 farms having a consistent short-term, not a 2-year wait, but a 3-week wait maybe to have their animals processed, which means you could turn around and sell those products, which means you're getting money in the door. It was the make or break difference of those farms closing up. And we know once I'm out of farming, your land most likely is not going to be ever used for food production again. So it was really critical to keep land in farming production. We were able to match their need with a funder who was able to provide the remaining sum of money to help them get toward completing the infrastructure build out, and they're just about ready to launch. So that will be an impact. So we're looking at replicating this. It's a farmer scaled, farmer driven model. And as a couple of people who looked at this said, huh, I'd like to be, how could we replicate this, and how could investors, private investors, so no debt service was incurred, how could we replicate this, and where would the competition point be? And as Greg and Elizabeth Putney said, look at, you could build one of these right across the road from us and the need would still not be met. So that's the kind of conversation we have in these groups, hearing opportunities, and then of course looking to see where we can as a group or as the backbone support organization support that. And I neglected to say that the participation in a working group does not mean like, okay, here you are, you're on your own. We've got staff. You've met our staff. We have money in the project budget for specialty trainers. We've got money in the budget and for bringing on not just an equity consultant to help guide the overall equity principles that are imbued in all of the investment and decision making. But we don't want to meet people committing to a working group to the point of fatigue. Want to come to the beginning, looking ahead and setting a reasonable virtual meeting schedule, and then know that our staff is will be the facilitators initially of these working groups, and working group members can say, hey, NYSOG staff, do you think you could give us a little bit more research on, or hey, do you think there could be money for, or hey, what are the other partners and groups in Western New York that are experiencing the same thing? So that's where we as staff and support personnel support the working groups. The working group members also like, hey, I'll take care of that. That's exactly what we're envisioning too, building leadership and initiative within the group. Yeah, another goal, increase market access for those small to mid-sized farmers and increase consumer access to local food by pilot testing and developing a network of sub-hubs. This is still going on. We had Chris Hartman from Headwater Food Hub outside of Rochester in the same virtual room with Dave Balzac from Eden Valley Growers, in the same virtual room with Jim Galabato from Brujota's in Jamestown. Those are the three regions food hubs. And, they're talking about the southern tier farmers, the rural farmers, Niagara County farmers want to grow and have access into those larger distributive areas. But none of those food hubs are equipped right now to run a truck from small farm to small farm to small farm to small farm and then take all that food back to the main food hub. So what about a couple of intermediary physical locations where small farmers would not have an onus of hours of travel, but could have a halfway stopping point that their food then could be picked up by any of those food hubs or e-commerce. So that conversation came into the working group and it's still going on now. And also in that conversation is urban growers. Urban growers are growing. Urban farms are hugely important to this work for so much of the focus on freshest food in often the highest need communities and neighborhoods. But we've got some urban farms that are growing enough that they can sell. And we know farmers markets, unless you've got staff and volunteers, take a lot of people power. And so often the higher price profit can come from growing your food and taking your food into that distributive network. You need less staff and your price point would profit margin would probably be more. So that's also in the equity lens of all. Remember, the equity lens is non-negotiable in any of this work, even if we're talking about bricks and mortar, especially if we're talking about bricks and mortar. Commercial kitchen processing, as I mentioned before, A lot of suggestions in this infrastructure working group and markets and buyers, and I think even among all the working group suggestions that we draw on UB Food Lab. UB Food Lab was specifically mentioned because we had several of the UB Food Lab professors and student researchers participate in the process of the assessment, which also there was another piece of that assessment that developed the food system map. So if you go to our website, www.foodfuturewny.org, you'll see food system map, and that was a result of the UB Food Labs work. It is parked on our website, and it is community populated. So the data sets that were used, it's hard to get real-time data, may have been older. So if there's a asset layer that is incorrect, or hey, that market's not here anymore, or where's this market, there's a send info, and you just jot a note, and the folks at University of Buffalo make the adjustment. Lots of links, and the Access, Equity, and Sovereignty Working Group had a specialty focus on creating healthy food priority areas, keeping food as close to and processed in those areas, and of course that would need infrastructure. Expand processing and value-added options for dairy farmers. So we know the fluid dairy milk prices, dairy farmers are basically held to the market prices that are established by complicated calculations that make no sense. A way to diversify is to incentivize more micro dairies and creameries. We have a partner who is on the regional leadership team. Her name is Megan Burley. She and her family run Burley's Berries and Blooms in Warsaw. They come from a family of dairy farmers. They have just created the nation's first micro creamery inside a cargo shipping container. So they worked for over a year, had a very specialty designed used cargo shipping container outfitted with a complete USDA and Ag and Markets approved commercial creamery, and they are making all kinds of cream on top milk, which is they're not making, they're processing it. It's not raw, it's safely low pasteurized, and it's not homogenized. So it's milk the way most of us probably remembered growing up, but ice cream, cottage cheeses, those types of value added products. There is unlimited potential for those micro diversified processing places to be set up in urban areas, rural areas, and suburban areas. So there's no limit. So how can we help support those initiatives? And working with existing BIPOC-owned businesses and run organizations to identify and implement opportunities for investment that supports their enterprise and more builds opportunities for more expanded BIPOC ownership. So as I said, if you get into the weeds of the full report verbiage, there is organizations, businesses that are mentioned as suggested partners. I didn't pull all of that stuff into this slide because that is a little bit deeper into the work of the working groups, but I did want to bring forward that the consultants were very adamant that this process should be led or partnered. Not at least assisted, it would be partnered by the Food and Racial Equity Council, which is interchangeably known as the Food and Racial Equity Team that we are beginning to format. But they've also suggested, Buffalo Go Green, Food Equity Network, and a whole host of other organizations. They're already in the work of BIPOC owned or run organizations. And really just looking at building those organizations and leadership capacities, because most likely they're not at parity with equal access right now. So how can we understand first what the barriers are, new or systemic, and what do we understand is an equitable, self-determined, empowered model, and then how do we all work as a collective to support that? Our funding also included access to grant writer. So that is one of the things. We've not hired one. The working groups and the regional leadership team will work to decide, remember, major decision-making parts of our project. Will decide on how a shared grant writer could best be used among the partners at the table of Food Future. So there are a lot of other specifics that I covered in a series of info sessions almost 3 weeks ago, doing the higher level breakout of what our funding supports, what we're looking ahead to just the first couple of years on initiating. This is all ramping up, and then where we're going 5, 10, 15 in perpetuity years. So as we wrap up here, working group. So remember, action. These are the action jacksons. Working groups are the most important structural component. Working groups are supported. We have a professional staff in place. We have partners that have availed their expertise and hands-on contributory resources. We meaning staff, will initiate the first series. We're looking at 4 months at a time. What we'd like to do is schedule working groups to meet officially on their own with a schedule predetermined and pre-published for 4 months at a time, so that it's on everybody's calendars, so that at the end of one meeting, the people who were at that meeting, we aren't all like, oh yeah, I can, and then we set the next meeting date, which exclude the people who weren't there. So we want to connect with you and follow up with these sessions. And if you're new to this work, contact us and we'll take your input as to when you feel would be a reasonable meeting frequency, virtual meeting frequency to begin with, what day of the week would work best generally for you, and what time. And even if that's evening, okay? So we want to keep this accessible to you, and know that we're in high farming season right here in Western New York. So we don't want to place a burden any greater on farmers or food producers during this season to try to squeeze in any more commitments during their height of their work. So we want to be as fair as possible. And that we do have a part of the funding was a pool of funds. It was not nearly as big as the consultants recommended. I think they recommended that each working group should have its own budget of $350,000 a year for 5 years minimum or something like that. That would be great. We didn't get funded anywhere near that, but we do have a pool of funds that is primarily set aside to be accessed by working groups working in partnership with the regional leadership team. So if an idea like, the Alliance Farm Butchery Project, we needed X amount of money, could this working group make a recommendation that some of that money in that discretionary pool is used for that project? That will be a conversation to the regional leadership team, and then the regional leadership team brings it to the NYSOG board. The idea is that it's not encumbered with months and months of paperwork or review, or you have to wait until the next annual grant cycle. This was evident that the food system changes daily, sometimes hourly, and that opportunities arise, issues arise, crises arise. And if there is at least a pool of funds that could generate, modest amount of unrestricted cash toward something that will make a difference to others, then that was the model. And that doesn't mean the initial pool of funds was also suggested that not only for the working groups, but if the working groups go, hey, you know what, a specialty trainer would really be helpful to not just us, but like to all of our partners that that would be appropriate too. And yeah, working group participants will get a stipend. So we're looking at 4 months blocks. If you can, if you've committed to and attended, maybe we haven't set the percentage yet, but the majority of the meetings, you will get a check in the mail, and you don't have to submit anything. We'll take your information and you will receive a check. We did this for the phase 1 assessment because a lot of those meetings ended up being in person, but regardless, you still have your time is valuable. And knowing that there's elder care, maybe childcare, so that you can have a Zoom meeting. Maybe you need to run through and get the kids a quick takeaway dinner. We don't need to know what you are doing with your money. We are just, will be a small token. I don't know what amount that is. We have a pool of funds, and it will depend on the number of people in the working group. So we don't want to run out of money. But as a reference, it was in the $400, $600 range for the assessment participation. One of the first things that we'll do with the working groups is have some input. We are creating a series of 1 day or 2 days or 3 days of self-driving field trips. Those are learning exchanges. We found that it was excellent for people that maybe live in one area to go as a group to a different area or a different community and visit this farm, visit this food processing place, look at maybe upstate Niagara as a big example, and maybe Megan Burley's Micro Creamery is the small example of the same kind of output. So we will work with the working groups to assist in curating a theme for each of those days, suggesting farms and food place businesses, and then we can develop some draft agendas. And then I forgot to write in money in our budget for like a coach bus. Everybody gets on the bus at the same time, which I now know is not realistic. It's 9 counties. We may be all starting from a different place. So, of course, we'll have mileage as a stipend. So yeah, and then we've got a funding in the budget to put on a full-scale 1-day summit or conference. Late winter, early spring is where we're looking, probably in the Buffalo, Rochester area, so that folks who don't have access to transportation could use public transit. It would be targeted for the 9 counties, but the theme and the agenda presenters will be informed by not only our equity consultant that will be soon onboarded, but also the regional leadership team, the working groups, and always going back to our focus on equity. So we've got a lot of different lenses, not different lenses, we've got a lot of lenses to consider in all of our work. And you don't have to commit for 5, 10, or 15 years, but know that we're in this work together for the longer term. And then a closing quote by Chris Hartman, who heads up the Headwater Food Hub right outside of Rochester, that he's one of those creators, inspirers. He is the light that lights me up with his energetic ideas for thinking big and thinking equitably. He was blown away with the power of knowledge and connections that he, who is a leader, experienced by dropping onto a working group and being on the regional leadership team, and that we must include boots on the ground, marching forward. There needs to be listening, sharing, strategizing, and planning together. And he is a supporter of our work going forward and will participate. So in closing, there we are. Please reach out to us at any time with any question. Any of us can walk you through any questions. If you're interested in learning more about the re-emerging regional leadership team or the soon-to-be newly formed Food and Racial Equity Council or team, let us know, because that's part of that's evolving. The work groups are here, we're ready. And so what to do? So from this point, if you are live in the session, we will follow up, drop your email. We'll follow up tomorrow with a link to this recording, a copy of this PowerPoint, and then a survey for you to let us know what are you interested in right now. And if you are interested, we'd love to have you. But also what would be your schedule? What days and time frequency would it be best for you so that you could commit? And then working groups and all members will have to agree once we get moving officially to basic group guidelines. You're going to be in a space either virtually or in person with people that you may not share their same opinions. It all comes, there's a place at the table for everybody in the food system work, and that we will all agree to abide by those 6 basic operating principles. And whether you join a working group or any part of this or not, we'd love to have you as a partner, and it's no cost. It's not a sponsorship. We have a form that you fill out. Basically, it's a nuts and bolts. Where are you located? Who are your staff? How should we contact you? Can we list you as a partner? And that means send us your logo. And as we evolve our website, we will have your logo front and center as a partner of our work. And then read the report. So we have time for a few quick questions. If anybody's online that you may like to unmute, give us a question. If not, we will follow up with you at the end of tomorrow with an email. All right. We'll connect with anybody with questions offline. Thank you, everybody. I wish you well.